You're live. Okay, I'm having usually I can just kind of pull up and the queue what previous videos I might have done on a subject. I don't see when Harry met Sally in the older lists. I mean, here's broadcast news and here's Casablanca, and either of those might contain some Harry and Sally. I don't know if I ever recorded all of my other previous thoughts. So I'm saying additional new thoughts for this one. Oh, Eat, Pray, Love. Maybe there's some in that. I don't know. Anyway, I was watching a video that was not specifically about film writing and stuff. It was more about the character relationships, and I definitely could go on about Harry and Sally, and so yes, I will. I had written a whole long thing before that I thought I had read in one of my videos, and like I said, I just don't know what video that would be in, and this will not be that. Anyway, the thing that kind of struck me when I was watching their video, and I didn't leave a comment because they already had a zillion comments, and I figured, all right, never mind, I'll just make my own video that nobody will ever see, and fine. Well, although it was kind of funny because I was watching a different video just the other day that I thought was going to be a decoration design video, but it turned out to actually be about women's clothes. And but one of the images they had was Sally in the bookstore holding the book, and I hadn't noticed lately, or maybe I had noticed before and forgot. It says and this is one of her ripoff of Annie Hall kind of looks, although it's the slightly less Annie Hall and slightly more 80s updated look. But the book she's holding says "Too Smart for Her Own Good" on the cover, and I was, laughing. At least that's what she tells herself before she rushes into her next, 5 failed relationships, right? Thinking of, people that we've known, maybe even more than Sally. Then I'm going to come back to that. And one of the things they were saying in their video was that Harry and Sally are being authentic with each other. And I don't know if Harry typically only meets phony and authentic shallow women. I'll come back to that in a minute too. But he certainly is. He goes through these 2 phases, and we'll come back to that. He gets married and then he regresses and that kind of thing. I don't know why I'm, talking about movies when hardly anybody ever watches movies anymore anyway, but this one's a classic and it seems to be an autumn favorite, so hopefully this gets some traction. Part, should I do the part 1, part 2, part 3 thing? I don't know, just in case. I'll say part 1. The first thing I noticed in their thing was the parts that they liked, especially regarding Harry, was the parts when, in the modern dialogue, he's simping for her, right? And it's kind of like he stops his usual deflection or argumentation or whatever, or making a joke, to just say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and he kind of does, or "What's the statute of limitations?" is the first one on apologies, and she says 10 years and gives him, the freebie, but this is the stage when they become friends, before they become romantically involved for that brief period or whatever. But when we first see Harry, when Harry actually met Sally, he's dating Amanda. Okay. And we know this, and we are seeing them in only one night of their life when they drive from Chicago to New York. And already, I'm doing the actual plot stuff out of order because again, we're talking more about the characters. Already, he's smitten with her, but doesn't really understand why. He's kind of got that dopey look, and she's doing the receipts and stuff at the table. And then she's like, "What? Do I have something on my face?" And he's like, "You're very attractive," and then she blows it out of proportion as to be a come on rather than a compliment. But at the same time, it's Harry. He's definitely interested in her. He isn't entirely sure why, other than she looks cute, at this point. And so we see, as time goes by, I don't want to do this all out of order. I think part of the reality of Sally, I didn't write this all out logically to go with their video, so it's kind of awkward. Because I don't want to put all the stuff that should come later before the stuff that comes. But anyway, in the film, what I think Sally gets away with is what they call that pretty privilege now. People project onto her what they want because she's cute about her personality. What her actual personality could be is maybe irrelevant to them. Her actual self, yeah. And he, through the years, not just at this table, is kind of waiting patiently for her to catch up, and while she runs her mouth and stuff. And he's pretty much at the end of the movie the only one in the whole world who wants to put up with all her bull crap for the rest of his life. That's maybe why she can't find a real relationship that lasts longer than a few months, or well, we don't know how long it is with Joe. About 4 years. So that's maybe her longest relationship, something like that. There could be. I was going to compare this to some other movies later. Harry and Sally is kind of a unique movie. So let me backtrack. In that it's just these two characters for the most part interacting with each other and their ups and downs. It's not like other Hugh Grant variety movies and things where it's almost always a love triangle with the kind of Jane Austen, Mr. Darcy thing, which may or may not be ho-hum. I have to come back to that too. So anyway, so these critics, like I said, they were happy when Harry apologizes. They were mostly saying that he lies to women to get the S, the physical. I don't know what I'm allowed to say and not say, but he does not actually. And Sally lies to the men to keep them, to feign interest, the faking and the famous scene, right? He does not actually lie to Sally in the beginning or even later that I can recall. Now, when he does meet Sally, like I said, he's dating Amanda, so he is trying to cheat on his girlfriend, who is also her friend. So that's more awkward than dishonest with her. But he tries to play it off, and he sort of pretends it's a joke. Hey, you want to get a motel instead of driving all night? And she's already revolted or annoyed, and he fails in his newly found quest to slay the demon or whatever. But like I said, he thinks she's cute, but he's not emotionally invested in her yet at all at this point. So he doesn't get too angry. He's not really upset at being shut down. He doesn't pursue her when they first in New York. They shake hands in the morning and he walks off, and they never expect to see each other again. And she's actually the one who expresses the regret. You're the only person that I know in New York. It's like, well, here's your chance. Give him your number. But she doesn't do that either. She just kind of like lets it go too. And then when he sees her on the plane, and he fails again to, get a date or one nighter or whatever. He's still not angry. And in fact, at this point, he's already told her he's engaged and getting married. And she's like, hey, is she? You know, like we see this kind of new bitchy kind of side of Sally we didn't know existed. Like I said, I'll come back to that in a minute. I don't know that anger and other, you know, like heavy pursuit, no, I must have her, are the only possible permutations of his behavior at this point for someone who, you know, is in his shoes, I guess. Those were the, you know, top two that would come to mind. I would think of someone who is, you know, like I said, a little more emotionally attached than just, I'd like that, you know, that looks good, it's here, why not, you know. And the thing that really annoyed me about their take on this that comes up in the next morning, or next moment, let me loop back. Okay, so skipping back ahead to when he first says, what's the statute of limitation on apologies? And this will tie back together with what I was just about to say. They were like, this is a great moment for Harry. And it's like, yeah, but these are two pretty big simp moments in a sense, where Harry kind of shifts the balance of power a little bit to her or whatever. The one, like I said, the first one, they conclude, and I mostly agree, that she deserves a free pass here because he hit on her and was dating someone else at the time. And so in the modern convention, now, especially, that makes Harry the dirtbag. And the second one is maybe he should capitulate a little bit less, and lets her off the hook. But he kind of has to, in terms of the story, because that letting her off the hook there leads to the next kind of plot point more. So it's kind of like, oh, Harry, why didn't you, you know, get the apology from her too or whatever? But then if he did that, then we wouldn't have the later friction that comes back. So kind of like, yeah, in a in a perfect world versus a movie, right? Because it was saying, as a therapist, he would have let them have this moment, but then he would have pressed her for her accountability that is not, you know, it's dropped. Harry apologizes. They go back in to the room with Jess and Marie and yada, yada, yada. And the rest of the day just unfolds. I'll never want that wagon wheel coffee table. Right. And so going back to what I was talking about, you know, again, he's always kind of doing this. He's not really that upset at being shut down the first two times either. Shot down, I should say. But also, they completely forgot, and I think both of these guys are older than I am. They completely missed that there was something going on in that time period of the late 70s that lingered from the 60s called the S, where Harry is not doing as much creepy as we're kind of looking at him from the later 80s to the now kind of perspective. This whole idea of him kind of cheating on the girlfriend at that time would actually just make Harry kind of a cool guy and Sally kind of a square. Now, we know she's not a prude because when they first walk into the restaurant, she has this embarrassing moment when the music goes off and, I have had plenty, you know, and everybody looks at her and then she gets all embarrassed. And I'll come back to that moment in a minute too. So we know she's active and he's not. He figures, well, if she's active and I'm active, then what's the problem? Let's get a motel. See what I did there? I didn't let it lie. And he's being a jerk, but he's not being, in, again, the context of that decade, a complete jerk. Because even in the mid-'80s, there was a Rob Lowe, Demi Moore movie, About Last Night, where they changed the title from the S Perversity in Chicago play title that was about the LTA, or living together arrangement, that I read a long article about it. I forget if it was Irma Bombeck or who, but way back when, I think it was Irma Bombeck, had written an article in like 1972 about this. And so even 10 years later, this was living together out of wedlock was still a pretty big deal to a lot of people. And so Harry and Sally is not in a vacuum. That was what was going on in 1977. Was it was like, oh, we can just do this. We don't have to answer to anybody like our parents or society. And so that kind of got skipped in their analysis. So I really, really had to jump on that point, in addition to the simp point. That again, I didn't leave a comment that nobody will ever find this video. But other stuff. Okay, I'm sure I forgot something, but I'll remember in a minute. Anyway, so as we learned through the course of the movie, though, what I think I pointed out before in my previous long thing that I may or may not have posted on here, is that, you know, Jess can't stand Sally. The black waitress, when she's ordering the sandwich or whatever, can't stand Sally. Neither of them can figure out why Harry puts up with her at all. You know, there might be others in the film that I'm forgetting. And so as we, like I said, we have this journey where Harry figures out Sally or whatever. So, okay. I might have forgotten something that I wanted to touch on there, but hopefully we'll remember and we'll come back to it. So yes, part 2, for those of you who skip ahead for no reason in a video like this where there's no reason to skip ahead because it all follows for a change. It's not a different topic, but this is where I'm going to talk more in detail about their actual characters a bit. And some of this I already wrote down and some of it I didn't. So I'm going to read the part first and then hopefully get to all those other things that I mentioned before. Sorry. We don't get much of a full view of Sally's dating / S life, intimate habits, from our glimpse of her with Joe and then their conversations. Harry, we know, is a serial dater and has already been since college. Now, this is what I was talking about, his 2 kind of phases. Sorry. So it's kind of strange that he even gets married to begin with, and this was kind of what, you know, the focus. But he obviously has some emotional attachment to Helen, at least after she dumps him. And there's no mention of him cheating on her, even though he's gone back to sleeping around, like Sally says, for revenge, you know, and out the door without even knowing their name, maybe. And, you know, he's assuming that he's been their greatest night ever, you know, but Sally insists that many or most are likely faking, and he doesn't stick around long enough to find out. You know, how much of that is true, we don't know because we don't see these scenes. We only get Harry's conversations with her and with Jess. For, you know, you made a woman meow was the moment that they stuck on the other, you know, which you know, like how teach me, like they said. Nevertheless, it's Helen that actually finds somebody new and dumps him. And we have no reason to believe that Ira is any better than, you know, Sheldon the Wonder Schlong in, you know, the bedroom from the looks of him. Or whatever. You know, he just looks like some lawyer or dentist or whatever. He says that Sheldon can do your taxes. I don't remember what Ira does. I know I think he mentions Ira's profession at some point, but whatever. Not important now. So we know Harry and Helen were doomed from the start anyway. When he tells he tells Sally way back on the plane that she's keeping her name, you know, etc. That was all kind of 80s power woman kind of stuff. I'll come back to that in a minute. So there's a lot to unpack with Harry there, but with Sally, again, we get mixed messages that she sleeps with enough guys to fake these orgasms and get apparently really good at it and stroke their egos so they'll stick around and endure her, quirks and put up with her moods. I don't know if Sally has mood swings so much as she hides her emotions, but surely she has some days that you don't want to deal with her or whatever. But we also know that she hasn't dated anyone since Joe, because this is the argument they're having on the steps when he apologizes the second time. I never see this back up on you, you have, and that'll make it better when I've, gotten dirty with someone instead of dating them. No thanks, and she stands up for herself there. So did she perfect faking it with Joe? Was that the guy? It's unclear, or was she already really good at it from these couple of years after college before she met Joe? I mean, apparently she was pretty busy for those 5 years, because then it's almost 5 with Joe is all we really know about her and Joe. So again, either she learned it before or after she started dating him, how to be the best faker ever. Again, unclear. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So yeah, when she sees Harry at the airport, it's unclear how long she's actually been with Joe, but he says it's clearly the beginning of the relationship because he's liking the relationship, or the beginning of a relationship at the airport to, going to a nightclub or whatever. You never take me to the airport anymore. But she's already, all mushy with Joe saying, I love you and kissing him. And so it's been at least a few months, but not quite 2 years or anything, somewhere in there. So like, yeah, we don't get to learn everything about Sally that maybe we would want to make. Again, now Sally's not a real person. Sally's a movie character. So of course they're omitting a lot of stuff. Like I was talking about Bridget Jones, there's no scene, and I was going to talk about, maybe girls I knew when I was young, that which ones were kind of like Sally that I could say this character could exist in reality instead of being too perfect or whatever. But we never have that scene of her getting too drunk and, puking on her shoes at college. We don't have that scene where she's, hallucinating with her boyfriend and gets pregnant or whatever, It's not Bridget Jones for sure. And Bridget Jones written as a diary, like the book, I think I mentioned this in some video, I don't remember, but I read the book first and I didn't get any of the jokes or whatever. I was just like, what is the, I was bored, but I wanted to like the character, because you could tell, okay, the whole point is that she's flawed, but we're supposed to like her. Whereas Sally, her flaws are a lot more, again, quirky annoyances. Like she's finicky eater. Okay, that's not, she's 30 pounds overweight and smokes a pack of cigarettes every day. Like, again, slightly different deal. And there's a few glimpses where, if we're using the modern vernacular, like narcissism and empaths and all that kind of thing. I don't know if that'll affect the sound, but we do have some scenes early on where we could call either Harry or Sally or both narcissists, because there's the one bit right after she embarrasses herself and then she sits at the table and he's like, fine, don't tell me. And she's like, well, if you must know, it's kind of like, no, you have to know my story. So that's a very serious, like, narcissist moment, more than we ever really see her being terribly empathic, although there's like little glimpses of her kind of, not being as totally self-absorbed. I mean, that maybe that's part of the reason she wants to be friends with Harry and kind of help him out of his misery and depression of his, divorce and whatnot. But she's certainly, she's a happy, bubbly person, but she's not like volunteering at the soup kitchen or anything like that either. She's, what's that girl in Brooklyn that, if you've seen that film, which starts off as kind of one thing and then kind of is a rom-com, but not really a rom-com in the same sense. Like that girl, she doesn't like do it on purpose, but she does end up at the soup kitchen ladling out the dinner, so she's definitely not that, but then Harry, I guess most people would say Harry's a total narcissist, because otherwise, why would he be out, trying to slay every woman he can meet, But Harry isn't. Again, I don't think, maybe they say he was lying to the other women and maybe he's manipulating them. Again, we don't see how he meets them. We don't see, but he does kind of say it to Jess, the Bruno Kirby character, that he kind of does engage in this behavior a little bit. How far he goes, I don't think he's telling any gals that he's the king of Sweden or something. I don't think he's misrepresenting himself too bad. I think it's more he's pretending he's not a commitment phobe when he totally is. But again, why is he a commitment phobe before his marriage is going to be for different reasons than after his marriage? Because like she says, for revenge, and that makes sense because yeah, he's damaged. Helen has, sucked the life out of him or whatever, and he's trying to just keep going and not even necessarily looking for a relationship because the last relationship destroyed him. Whereas before, again, is it just the context of the times? Maybe does that give him the free pass? In which case, if he's serial dating and misrepresenting himself, it's maybe to look good to a woman who ordinarily wouldn't pay him the time of day kind of thing, because he's this Sally notices he's the weirdo, he's the Prince of Darkness, yada yada yada. He's too moody and creepy and reads the last page of the book in case he dies and all this kind of stuff. Again, a total nod to Annie Hall, right? But the movie definitely not as cynical as Annie Hall. But again, the caveat there that the original ending was a tragedy, not the happy ending that they figured out how to make it work. And everybody got this movie that now they all love, instead of being the movie that everybody goes, oh, I saw that one. What a weird movie, So again, a touchstone, the one that gals in their 20s are still watching and talking about on the internet, or maybe 30s on the internet. But like I said, we get these glimpses of Harry better than Sally because again, he vocalizes them. Sally, a lot of her vocalizations are attacking Harry for his behavior, in case you hadn't noticed. And like I said, sometimes he does push back, and he actually pushes back more the longer he knows her and the more they go on. But then they have their breakup and she won't even answer the phone, and then he's really, really like, hey baby, call me, and if it was any other girl besides Sally, I guess we'd tell him that, dude, remember Helen? Just let it go. She's another Helen, just let it go, so that, so yeah, it's definitely, a very interesting film. One of the ones that, like I said, if I had that other document, I'd pull it up now and just start reading from it, because I've definitely, talked and written about this film before. So that's my take for now. I like I said, I don't know if I covered every angle of the movie or every angle of their character or every thing, but I hope that helps. If, like I said, if you're kind of writing characters and you're kind of stuck and you're not sure what it is that you can't put your finger on, because they even said that when they first, the two guys in the other video, when they first saw this movie, Harry and Sally were two characters they didn't like at all. Whereas, of course, I liked Harry. I thought he was funny because he's this slobby kind of guy, and Rob Reiner had similar character with John Cusack in The Sure Thing, which was actually a movie that I liked better because I was young and it made more sense to me than all this kind of yuppie relationship stuff. Now I'm a little bit older and I don't watch The Sure Thing as often as I still go back and maybe watch Harry and Sally, but I definitely don't watch Harry and Sally every single year anymore like I did for a while there when I was young and idealistic or whatever. And again, trying to compare real life gals to Sally and only coming up with like a couple over the years, and most of the good ones are married by the time you're a certain age or whatever, and you're going, oh man, I blew it with her, but then you remember back and you go, well, not really, because this and that, all that kind of thing. But so if you're watching this movie to get like, I don't know, dating advice or something, you're probably going in the wrong direction. I think, enjoy the film for what it is, and don't necessarily try and take too much real life from it. But again, it's a nice slice of the 80s for sure, and nostalgia and all that. So yeah, I don't know what else to add. So if you have any questions, of course, put them in the comments, and maybe you'll jog something in my memory that I forgot that I said I was going to circle back to and didn't, or whatever. I thought I covered all the bases more or less. Let me know.